Hi there. I'm world-renowned internet influencer and gold medal winner Jared Spool. And today we're going to talk about the UX Leader's secret guide to innovative, user-driven product roadmap. Now, a few weeks ago, I was having a conversation with a UX leader who was telling me how they had just shipped their product. They were really excited about it. However, immediately the product manager came to them and gave them 3 more projects to work on, none of which they knew anything about. And they just had no idea how they were going to make this happen. The product manager told them that they had to actually have this thing delivered to the customers at the end of the quarter, which means that they probably had about 3 weeks to get the design done so that the developers would have enough time to code and test and make this thing ready for delivery. And the UX leader was completely confounded by this idea that they could be expected to do this work in only 3 weeks. And while they were talking, all I could think about was that scene from the old I Love Lucy show. You've probably seen it. It's a scene where Ethel and Lucy are working in a chocolate factory. And they have a simple job. All they're supposed to do is pick up chocolates off the conveyor belt, wrap them up, and put them back to go put in boxes. But the conveyor belt speed, it just seems to get faster and faster, and the chocolates seem to come more and more frequently. And the result is that they are completely overwhelmed, and pretty soon they're sticking the chocolates inside their hats and their clothing, and they're eating as much as they can, and they're trying to get the chocolate under control. The issue is that this is what our UX process feels like. We absolutely have no control whatsoever over the speed and order that the chocolates are coming down the pike, that new features are coming at us. And we don't have any time to prepare. No advanced work has been done, so we have no way of knowing what it is that we're supposed to be doing. We have really no clear understanding as to what the users want. And everything feels like it's committed, and it's so political to try and say, well, wait a second, we need more time. What we're talking about here, we call reactive UX. It's when we're completely just responding. We're not doing anything else but responding. And we have no control over that work that's coming at us. We're working really hard. We're trying to deliver great value. And we feel like we're always failing because we can't get things done in the time frame we have to do it. Now, if you go back and you look at that scene in I Love Lucy, it's that wall with the hole in it. That's the problem. We have no conversations with the people on the other side of that wall. We don't know why they're speeding up the conveyor, if they understand that we can't keep up. We have no idea how they made any of the decisions that they've made. And we have to figure out a way to get involved on what's going on the other side of that wall. We have a name for this. We call this proactive UX. Proactive UX is when we have control over these things. We're able to set up the nature of the work. We're able to determine the order. We're able to control the speed. We're able to do pre-work and see what's happening up front. And when people talk about having a seat at the table, this is often what they're talking about. We just want to get access to that. We want to know how to control that. Now, teams do both proactive and reactive UX. There's always some combination of it coming on. But for most teams, reactive UX is basically 80% of their effort, while proactive UX is only 20% of the effort. But what if we could reverse that? What if we could make it so that proactive was the majority of our time? We could get that up to 80% and have only the reactive UX part be the remaining 20%. This is why we need to think about this. We need to figure out what proactive UX really means for us. I mean, what it means is that we've got a shared understanding about why we're doing the things we're doing. And we're choosing the order in which we're doing it based on the highest value to the customer, to the user, to our business. And that the decisions we make are based on empirical research. Now, this move from reactive UX to proactive UX, this is a type of transformation. And transformations come in three basic approaches, right? We can change the tool set that we use. We can change the skill set that we use. And we can change the mindsets. And we have to frankly do all three of these, at least in this instance. We're going to need to change our tools, our skills, and we're going to need to upgrade the way we think about things. Changing our tools, that's definitely the easiest part of this. Whereas changing mindsets, that's the hardest part. But it's doable. One of the first mindsets we have to change is that there is no seat at the table. I don't know where this notion of that there's a table somewhere and it's got Herman Miller chairs and this is where all the important things are done. But in most organizations, nothing is done at a table, right? Things are done before you get to the table. They're done after you leave the table. But the table itself, it's just a meeting. And so, if you're big enough to get a seat at the table, mostly what that means is, you get more meetings. And even though there's no seat at the table, there is a centralized decision process. It's what's happening behind the wall. And in a lot of organizations, what that is the roadmap, the product roadmap. The product roadmap is this sort of central vision of what the organization is going to build, what it's going to ship. And the product roadmap is really this key juncture where we codify the vision of what the products could be. When we're manipulating the product roadmap, we're controlling the order and the speed where commitments are made. And so if we can get involved in that process, it's as if we're breaking down that wall. Now, what is a roadmap? The roadmap is this document, for lack of a better term. So it can be just Post-its on a wall. It can be a PowerPoint deck. It can be lots of different things. But what it has in common, what all product roadmaps have in common, is they talk about what is going to happen, right? It describes the order and the speed by which we deliver things. And it puts these things in terms of some framing of now, and then what we're going to work on next, and then what we're going to work on later. And they come in all different shapes and sizes. Sometimes they have actual dates, and sometimes they just have releases, and sometimes they just have an order of things you're going to do with no real sense of time whatsoever. And sometimes they're shared with customers, and sometimes they're kept quite private. And the roadmap itself is very much a flexible, living document. It's this thing that drives the major decisions in the organization. So in essence, this is the thing that if there were a table, we'd be talking about at the table. Now, often when I talk about how UX leaders need to really be thinking about the product roadmap, their first response is, but that's owned by product management. They're responsible for this. And they're right. They probably are responsible for this. This is sort of the core document, the core thing that a product manager does. But managing the roadmap is an extremely risky thing to do. And it's a little too risky for one person to own all of it. And more importantly, on the UX side, we are uniquely qualified to reduce that risk. We have superpowers that we can put into the process of creating the roadmap and managing the roadmap that could be really helpful to those product managers who are focused on it. So we can be heroes to them by actually helping them reduce the risk. And here's why that is. Everything that's on that roadmap is in essence a UX decision, right? Think about, right? Even performance things, things that are very technical, have no UI, those things are also UX decisions. In the basement of Netflix, there's a team of people whose job it is to get bits on and off the servers at Netflix. And the thing is that everything they do is very technical. There's no user interface to it. Nobody in the outside world knows exactly what they do. They just cower in the basement eating their Chinese food and figure out how to make the servers run quickly. So you could say, well, there's nothing there that has anything to do with UX. And that would be correct up until the moment that you're watching that television show and that little spinner happens. And suddenly everything they do has to do with the UX. Because their performance is causing a UX issue. So everything on the roadmap is UX related. I mean, frankly, if it's not affecting a user, why are we talking about doing it? Right? Someone has to be affected by this. That's why we're doing it in the first place. So we can think of the roadmap as this central control point inside the way the organization thinks about the product. There's what we've already delivered, and there's what we're working on now, and there's what we're going to work on. Now, normally, UX sort of happens after we've decided what goes into the roadmap, and we've gotten to what we're working on now, and we hand it over to the UX team. And we say, okay, go design this. And that's what we would call, reactive UX. But what if we were to put user research into that process? What if we were to get the user research to contribute to what goes into the roadmap? If we did that, that's what would be known as proactive UX, right? Proactive UX is this process of getting things into the roadmap, getting work done before it shows up on the roadmap, so that when it's time to work on the thing to get it ready for the developers, we already know what to do. We're already set up. We have everything we need. So that's what we're going to talk about. So let's start by picking something off the roadmap and just asking, what's the use case for it? So, I don't know, something that often appears on a roadmap. I know, blockchain. What's the use case for blockchain? That's not a good one, because there absolutely is no use case for blockchain. I know, I got another one. Data export. Data export is this feature that eventually you have to build. If you have an app, you're going to have to build data export. And the way it works is probably like most features work. There's some client who asks their salesman for it. The salesman comes in and says, client's going to give us this big bag of money if we implement data export, so we got to implement it. And of course, we're not excited to implement it. It's not a fun feature to build. It's probably not something we can market. Hey, version 4, it's great. It has data export now. So it's going to go down on the roadmap somewhere, but eventually it bubbles up to the top, and now we have to work on it. Now we have to figure out in the next 3 weeks what data export is and how it's going to be so we can get that big bag of money from a customer that nobody even remembers who the customer is, let alone why they needed it. So what are the use cases that could be for this thing? Well, maybe they needed a backup. Maybe the whole reason they wanted data export was they needed to back something up. Well, okay. That's great. They have a backup. But here's the problem with that backup. They'll also need a way to restore, right? We're going to have to build 2 interfaces, not just one, a data export and some sort of data import. So that's a lot of work. We didn't talk about the import part. There's another use case for it, right? That they have this thing set up in their New York office, and they just want to set it up in their brand new LA office, and so they're just going to open the thing up and import in the data that from New York and just start over and have it all set up real quick, create a new instantiation of this thing. Except the problem there is, do they want all the data from New York, or do they just want the meta structure of the data from New York? So again, we're going to have to create some sort of filtering tools. Who knows what they need? We don't know. And so that's where we have to build. Of course, there's another use case that this could be. They could need to import this data into some sort of third-party product. So we could just give them a way to put it in, but we need to know what the file formats that those third-party products use. And maybe there's more than one. And do we support all of them? I mean, there's a lot of file formats out there, so how do we know which one to support? Well, maybe it's Excel because it's always Excel, and so that probably means that they just need it in CSV format, but do they need all the data or just be able to select some of the data? What are they going to do with the data? Well, maybe they're going to make charts. Which begs the question, why aren't they using the charts that we already have in the product? Is it because they can't find the charts that we have in the product, or is it because the product itself doesn't have good charts? I mean, there's a lot of things going on here. Maybe the charts they need to produce are to show progress to management. It's like, well, why don't we have a chart that shows progress to management? And is a chart the right way to show progress? Is there maybe some sort of dashboard? Is there other way to show progress? And that's the thing about these features, right? Any given feature, it could have a lot of use cases, and we can guess. We don't have any data as to what these customers actually need. We don't even know if more than one customer needs this. And yet here we are going to build it and design it and make it work. And what are we actually doing here? So that's the thing, right? Features, they just sort of pop up. And suddenly we've got all these features that are just like data export, and we know nothing about them. And the roadmap, what the roadmap does is it puts it in some sort of order, an order where we figure out which release this is going to go in. The stuff that's in this release that we're working on now, the stuff that's in the release that we're working on after this, or the one after that, or the one after that. And as I mentioned before, this is what all roadmaps have. They define what's now, what's next, what's later. But here's the thing. What do we actually know about data export? I mean, is it the right solution? Is there time to explore better solutions? Can we do some sort of discovery on this problem? Why is this even valuable to customers? Without knowing these things, the odds of us getting the design right are probably pretty slim. So what we want to think about is that basically a feature is a solution. And as a solution, it's really not known what we're trying to do. So the tool that we can apply to this is something called a UX outcome, a user experience outcome. And a user experience outcome is something that results in benefit to our users, right? Outcomes are sort of the opposite of outputs. Outputs are just things we deliver, but outcomes are things that make changes in the world. And a change that we can have in the world from a UX perspective is something that benefits our users. And so the way we frame UX outcomes is we just ask the question, if we deliver a great feature, how will that feature improve someone's life? And we start by saying, okay, here's the solution we're going to build. How is building that solution actually make an improvement in somebody's life? So let's take this data export thing. If we can figure out which use case, we can come out with an outcome for it. For example, for the use case of them needing a backup, well, the outcome is that they have fast recovery from an up-to-date backup when some sort of disaster strikes. But if it's that creating of a new instantiation, that new instantiation is, okay, the folks opening a new office, they can get up and running quickly with an application that is pretty much all pre-configured. Or maybe it's that report to show progress, that chart, right? So the use case is that we want to show progress of some sort. Well, in that instance, the outcome is that everyone easily sees the progress that we're making. So that's what an outcome is. It doesn't actually prescribe a solution. It just talks about what the effects of the solution are. It separates how we do it from what changes in the world once we've done it. And this turns out to be a useful tool because what we can do is we can take our roadmap of all these different features and we can, one by one, ask the question, what's the outcome? What, if we do a great job on each of these features, how do we improve people's lives? And in some cases, it might even be groups of features that have the same improvement. So they basically share the same outcome. And it's that collection of features that works together. So what we're trying to do here is shift our mindset from thinking in terms of features to thinking in terms of outcomes. But this isn't the only way we could do this. There's another way to think about this, which is the problems that we're solving. Remember, solutions are a solution to something. What are they a solution to? So to do that, we need to start with whatever the current experience is. So what is it that it's like to be a user today? And what's preventing that user today from getting that improvement in the UX outcome? Now, a lot of the ways that people sort of tackle this is that they start with the current experience and they just look at it intently and they say, oh, you know what? We could do this, we could do that. And they just generate a list of random features that then become the solutions that they're going to try to get the outcomes with. But that doesn't really work. Instead, what we need to do is look at the current experience and ask that question. What is preventing people from getting there today? What is preventing them from just having that improvement right now? And that's a problem we have to solve. Whatever that obstacle is, that presents a problem. We solve that problem, we create a solution, we use that solution to generate the outcome. Now, not every solution is going to get the improvement we want. There's a bit of play in here. But here's the thing. When we don't get the outcome we want, it just helps us understand the problem better. So now we're getting to know that problem really well. So let's think about those data export use cases, right? Start with needing a backup. We'd already established that the UX outcome for that is really fast recovery from up-to-date backups when the disaster hits. Okay. So what's the problem we have to solve? Well, right now, the data isn't being backed up. If something were to happen, they'd lose everything. We can definitely fix that. What about a different use case? The use case of needing that new instantiation, getting the LA office up and running, right? So that right now, the outcome is that they get it up and running really fast, that it feels really effortless to make that happen. What's preventing us from doing that today? Well, it takes a lot of work to create a new instantiation. You have to basically copy everything by hand, figuring out what's in the old system and just making a duplicate in the new system. That's really painful. And what about that case of showing progress? Well, We know that the outcome was that everyone can easily see the progress that we're making. Fine. Okay. So the big problem here is that right now, whatever this notion of progress is, it's neither tracked nor collected. This idea of problems to solve and outcomes, either one of these are acceptable for our roadmap. We just have to pick which one we want to use. Sometimes outcomes are the right thing because they're very positive, sometimes problems to solve. So we can look at our outcomes and we can say, you know what? Let's switch it over to problems to solve. Bingo. And we can do that because problems and outcomes are basically two sides of the same coin. Each one can be tied directly to value to the customer, right? If we get the improvement, customers will pay that. If we solve the problem, customers will pay for that too. And neither one of them describes a specific implementation solution. They give us the option to choose the solution that's most appropriate based on the outcome we have and potentially experiment to learn how to get there. So if we think about it this way, we could set ourselves a goal, right? We could say our goal is to get every feature on the roadmap to be stated as either a problem that we need to solve or a UX outcome. And with that as a goal, we could take it a step further. Whenever I set goals, I like to set intermediate goals, which I call party moments. A party moment is that moment when we can break out the beer and have a little party to say, hey, we're making progress. It's the exact moment we know to have that little celebration. So what are the party moments to getting to this point where we're reframing the roadmap to be either problems to solve or outcomes? Well, one moment would be the first time we get someone who's not on the UX team to start talking about something on the roadmap as an outcome or a problem to solve instead of a feature, right? That would be huge. If we can get them to talk about that, that would be incredibly huge. And another one would be if we could get everybody who's contributing to the roadmap to treat every new item as a problem to solve or a UX outcome. To not think of it as a feature anymore, not come and say, we have to implement data export, but come in and say, hey, we need to make sure that they have up-to-date backups, right? That would be a huge improvement. That would be a moment we could celebrate. And of course, the big one is when every item on the roadmap has a clear outcome or a clear problem that we're solving. And we can start from there. So that's sort of the first big mindset change, this idea that we are going to reframe the roadmap from features to problems to solve or outcomes. What's next? Well, let's go back to that use case for data export. There's so many things that data export could do. And if we had some better research, we'd be able to know which ones were there. If we had had a chance to talk to that salesperson and potentially get in front of that customer who had the data export problem, we could ask some questions. We could say, well, what is it that you can't do right now because you don't have data export? Could you show us? Could you walk us through your work and show where data export would be most helpful and what you're doing to get around the problem that you don't have it? If we could just ask those questions, we would know so much more about what it is we're supposed to design here. So when we talk about research, what we're really talking about is getting a deep understanding of the current experience. Now, one way to just think about the current experience is to break it into a map, right? A map where we're sort of measuring the experience on this scale of frustration to delight. And we can look at every step of what the user does. And in the process, we can see, oh, this first part, this was delightful, but then it got really frustrating. And then it got delightful again, and then it got really frustrating. And then it sort of just worked out. Okay. So now that we know that each of these steps, whether they're delightful or frustrating, we can map that out. And what we can do is think about this in terms of that's the current experience. And we can sort of say, okay, those frustrating bits, what's causing them? Where do those come from? What is it about the design? What is it about the process? What is it about what they're trying to do? What is it about them that makes those bits frustrating? And if we can understand that, we can nail down the problems to solve. And so now we're on our way. We can start to really get this big picture. Jen Cardello, who is the in charge of user research for Fidelity, she talks about when she got to Fidelity, they were really focused in this sort of reactive UX research mode, where their focus was that everything they were trying to do, they were just trying to make sure that it was built right, right? They're putting out a new feature. Did we build it right? Is it the right way? And things like usability testing, that type of research is very much focused on just making sure things are built right. It's really just an advanced form of quality assurance. But when she got there, she started to make a change. And within a few months, she had managed to get them to reframe, to rethink, to cast this differently. And instead start saying, well, before we focus on whether we've built it right, let's focus on whether we have the right problem. And then once we know that we've had the right problem, let's make sure we have the right solution. And then once we know we have the right solution, let's make sure we've built it right. And this is the thing, right? Great designers don't fall in love with the solutions they're producing. Great designers fall in love with the problem they're trying to solve. And so we need to give ourselves a way to really fall in love with the problem. We need that type of research. And this is what proactive UX research does, is it is really focused on understanding the problem. And much of it has to happen before the item gets onto the roadmap. Because if it doesn't happen until after, we don't have enough time to do it. Now, the interesting thing is that we can often combine it with other types of research. We can often put it out there so that while we're researching some feature that we're trying to get right because it's got to be ready for delivery soon, we can be checking in on other features. Hey, did you ever need to export data? Really? What did you need to export the data for? Can you show me what it did? If we just extended existing research sessions by a few minutes to explore things that are further down on the roadmap to really understand the problem, we could be really effective. So what we're trying to do is get a shared understanding amongst the entire team, because it's not just us who need to know this, but it's also the developers and the product managers. Everybody needs to understand what the problem is that we're solving. And that's because not every decision gets made with a UXer in the room. We may not be there when a decision is being made about the architecture or the priority or something. And as a result, they need to already have that information. So we have to get our research to these people. They have to understand not just the research, but the problem that the research uncovers. They have to understand what prevents people from getting the outcomes today. What is it about their current experience? The more we can talk about that, the better off we are. So given that, we need to be in this place where basically nothing goes onto the roadmap without UX research, right? This is our sort of brass ring. If we can get to this moment where nothing goes onto the roadmap without having had previous research. Salesman comes in and says, got a big bag of money, data export please. We say, that's great, let's go do some research. And as soon as we do the research, we'll know what to put on the roadmap. That would be an amazing change if we could just get that to happen. And you know what? It's not impossible to do. It's just a mindset shift. There are also party moments for this. There's a bunch of them, right? For example, the UX research, if we get some research done for an item while it's on the roadmap, before it bubbles its way up to the top, that would be great. Let's party over that. Another one, right? We get the research done for every item on the roadmap, right? We look through the next 2, 3 releases, whatever the roadmap measures, and say, hey, let's include this in research we have coming up. Let's put a team on making sure we understand the problems for each of these things. After all, if we're going to change things from UX outcome, or from features to UX outcomes, are we just guessing, or are we using research? It's the research thing that's going to make the difference. So we want to go there. Another time we could party is when a new item is added because something in the research said, hey, there's an opportunity here. This is something that not only we don't do, but none of our competitors do. We could be innovative at this moment. Or another party moment would be actually uncovering something that no other competitors do in their product. Right? That would be big in itself. And finally, another party moment might be to only have researched items allowed to be added, right? Nothing new can go on unless there's research to show that this is worth doing. And that gets us closer to this overarching goal of having everything on the roadmap dictated by the research that we've done. That's proactive research. Right now, in today's world, a feature shows up, just sort of shows up out of the blue. Data export, here it is, let's build it, right? And it gets added to the pile of all the other features. And then somehow, magically, this gets prioritized. Well, how does that get to the top? Well, I'm not sure how your folks do it today, but I can tell you a way to do it that actually will make all of this work very effectively. And that's to use this simple formula that I learned from Bruce McCarthy. The formula is this. In order to calculate the priority, we take the value to the customer, divide it by the effort it's going to take to build it, and multiply it by the confidence we have. So let's take all 3 of those factors apart here. So let's start with value, right? It's basically asking this question. How valuable is this item that's on the roadmap? And we can break that down. We can ask, well, are we talking about value to customers? Are we talking about value to our organization? And once we decide that, we can figure out, well, how do we want to express this? Do we want to put it in units of say, dollars? Or do we want to talk about the time we're saving our employees or our users? Or maybe it's just a simple scale where, it goes from 1 to 4, or 1 is minimal value, 4 is tremendous value, and we just sort of negotiate that. And the thing is, it doesn't really matter which scale we use as long as we're just consistent every time we prioritize. We can do the same thing for effort, right? When we talk about effort, we can ask, well, how much effort is this going to take? And are we talking about the effort to build, or are we also including the effort to maintain and support? And again, the units that we can use for this include things like the labor it's going to take to do it, or the amount of time it's going to take to build it, or the cost that it's going to cost us to get it built, right? Or again, we can put it on a scale from 1 to 4 and say, is it minimal effort or tremendous effort? Or, we can use something clever like t-shirt sizes. Is it a small t-shirt, a medium t-shirt, a large t-shirt, or, an extra large t-shirt? And those factors, value and effort, we divide effort into value so that we have this sort of ratio that tells us how much work it's going to take, and divide it into how valuable it is, and the things that are the most valuable and take the least amount of work are going to score the highest. But there's another factor. And that other factor is our confidence. Our confidence in terms of how much faith do we have in the estimates that we just gave for value and effort? Where'd those numbers come from? Now, the units for this is pretty simple, right? We just go on a scale of 0% to 100%. Basically, it's a number between 0 and 1. But where this confidence comes from, well, are we guessing or do we have research? The reality is the more research we do, the more confidence we can gain. And by having more confidence, our priorities should get higher. By multiplying value and effort against confidence, we actually keep the priority realistic. It allows us to make sure that we have evidence. Priority estimates give us an honest approach to how we calculate the confidence that we have. And the more we understand the problems that our users face, the more confidence we can have in their solution. So we need to really hone in on this confidence. We almost never in UX practice talk about where this comes from and how confident we are about it. We have to get better at that. Again, this is a minor change in tool set, a bigger change in skill set, but it's a big change, a really big change in mindset. Being able to stand up and say, I'm not really confident in what I'm telling you right now, is huge. And it puts the onus on us to go back and say, well, okay, what's it going to take to get more confidence? What's the research we need to do? What we're moving towards here is this idea of continual research, that we're always researching all the time because we need to boost the confidence to have that deep understanding of what the current experience is like. Now, the goal here is to really be honest about confidence. So that means that we have the teams constantly refining their confidence estimates from this ever-deepening well of understanding about what customers need and what's preventing them from succeeding today. And again, there are several party moments that we can fall back on to show progress. First, we can show progress when suddenly the team realizes that they've either overestimated value or underestimated effort because they just didn't do enough research. The fact that they have this realization, that's a big deal. We should celebrate that epiphany. But then we should also recognize that their current confidence is low and that they're asking for more research. That's a moment that's key. When they recognize that they don't have enough confidence and they need more research, that's fantastic, right? That's making the case as to why research is valuable. And then another time is when that team sees that their confidence is actually really high because they've been doing so much research. That's incredible too. And finally, we can celebrate when a team delivers the product or service where their confidence in the value and the effort matches up with the actual results they delivered. Customers tell us it's valuable, and the effort was in fact where we thought it would be. All of these things make a difference. So these are the necessary mind shifts that we have to go through. We're going to use our UX research superpowers to be able to reduce the risks from roadmaps. This is something that we hadn't really thought about before, but if we attack now, turns out to be really helpful. And then the research increases our confidence in the estimates behind that. And we get real benefit from constantly reframing everything from features to the problems that customers have or the outcomes that we're trying to get for those people. Right? This is making everything user-centered because we are putting humans into the discussion of a roadmap. How are we making people's lives better? By having prioritized outcomes, we ensure value. It means that the things that bubble to the top are going to be the most valuable things. That means we can actually deliver less in terms of actual numbers of features while delivering more because each improvement in the customer's life is going to be more valuable. And those mind shifts are really critical, but there's one more that we haven't talked about that's really big, which is that UX leaders are in fact servant leaders. A servant leader asks, how can I be of service? And that's what we're doing here, right? We've got people who already manage the roadmap. We're not suggesting that we somehow kidnap it and take it over. Instead, what we're talking about here is breaking down that wall, the wall that's on the other side of the conveyor belt, the wall that's setting the speed and control of what's coming down the pike. We break down the wall by moving from whose job it is and the role they have to what skills do we have on the team and how do we divide up responsibilities to be most effective. And when we use our UX skills to reduce risk, we are actually giving real power to the process of delivering value. And at that point, we can become really responsible for informing the decisions that are critical to the vision of the organization by delivering products that are completely informed by the research that we do. What we're talking about here is directing everybody's focus to those UX outcomes, to making that the centerpiece of what we're trying to accomplish. And when we do that, we start to make that shift to where we're doing proactive UX most of the time and reactive UX only a small part of the time. And we put humans into the roadmap by getting those UX outcomes there. This makes roadmaps that are more innovative and by far more user-driven than anything we have currently. So that's what I came to talk to you about. We have this opportunity to break down that wall and to start to get our superpowers to reduce the risk. And we do that by reframing features to problems to solve or UX outcomes. We do that by making more proactive user research happen. And finally, we do that by focusing on confidence and being honest about the estimates that we're giving for value and effort. And that's what I came to talk to you about. I want to take a moment and talk about an event that we have coming up in a couple weeks. This is our Taking Control of Agile UX event. It's an intensive, it's all online, it's 5 days long. It'll take you about 8 to 10 hours fully throughout the 5 days. You can find out more about it at leaders.centercenter.com. That's where this 5-day event is happening. If you work in Agile, you work in UX, you're struggling to get those things to work together, this is going to be the thing that helps you get there. We're going to get control back. And so if you like today's talk, that's going to be 5 days of basically the same intensity of advice. And it's a very intense thing, right? There's going to be homework. You should bring your team. should bring your Scrum Master, your dev leads, your product managers, have them all attend. And it's absolutely free online. Just go to leaders.centercenter.com and we will get you signed up and you can be part of this. It's happening February 1st through 5th. Finally, if you're found this the least bit interesting, you can get more information at uie.com. You can reach me at jspool@uie.com, or you can connect to me on LinkedIn if you work in design or product management or development and we're not connected on LinkedIn, please do that. And finally, you can follow me on the Twitters at jmspool, where I tweet about design, design strategy, design education, and someday I hope to tweet again about the amazing customer service habits of the design industry. Thank you very much for encouraging my behavior. So how'd we do, Ed?
Terrific, Jared. There's been copious comments and questions in the chat area. With that, I guess the first thing I'd like to start off with is a really thought-provoking question from Praveen. And I'll read his question and why I think it's so interesting. He says, how to identify needs that are not a part of the current experience, but will contribute to awesome UX outcomes. And this reminds me of a description you gave of what Disney Resorts does for their guest rooms. Mm-hmm. Something to do with towels or something, the way they just made these ordinary objects of delight. So where does that, how do we identify that? Where does that creativity come from?
Right. So the example that you're giving is that Disney, back when they had guests, would, when you would leave your room, the housekeeping folks would come in and they would make, as they're cleaning, they would pick up the towels, put in clean towels, and they would take the towels and they would basically form them into origami animals. And if you Google Disney origami towel animals, or Disney towel origami, you'll see lots of images of these things that they make, and that's absolutely a delightful thing, right? The key here is that Disney's looking at the current experience when they're doing this, right? There is no way to really sort of get to that innovation without exploring the current experience. But what they have a lens that they look through for things, which is there's a sort of design philosophy at Disney, which is every aspect of the Disney experience needs to have something which they refer to as Disney magic. It's a term that Walt himself coined, and it's very much part of the culture at Disney World. And what Disney did in sort of making that part of it is that they are always looking at the experience that guests are having, and they're looking for instances where there is no magic, right? Where there is nothing that makes people laugh or giggle or be surprised. And as a result, they can see that there's a glaring period of time where no magic is happening, and then they go and they fix that, right? So you're always looking at the current experience. You cannot, if you just sit here and just try and come up with smart ideas and they are not connected to current experience, they're not going to work. There's no way to figure out what the value of that is, right? I guarantee you, anything that you think is spontaneously delightful that you had never expected before, it started by people paying attention to the current experience. And that's just the way it works. So that's how that works. You have to do what Disney did. You have to come up with a variety of different lenses and ask basically how does the current experience look through that lens? And like Disney does, they look through the lens of Disney Magic. They have lots of other lenses they use too, but that's a big one for them.
I've used software applications where, you know, maybe there's a mapping display, and I didn't realize that, oh, this particular mouse click or right click would do things that I just, you know, who reads documentation, right? It's not documented, if anyway. And it did something that just surprised me and delighted me.
Right.
It's almost like an Easter egg that you find.
Sure.
But it's useful.
It is. But those things are, I guarantee you, someone was thinking about the current experience and when they put that Easter egg in.
Okay, so more in terms of practicality, Zosia, I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. Is it possible to consider both the effort of building and of maintenance? Both are necessary aspects of the product. How do you evaluate both in your equation of value?
You just give them each their own number and you multiply them together, right? So you can have a 1-to-4 scale for the effort to build and a 1-to-4 scale for the effort to maintain, and you multiply them together. If you don't want to multiply them together, or you want them to be weighted differently, you can, you know, give maintenance a 1.5 times value and to buildings 1-time value, because maintenance is an ongoing cost, whereas building is a 1-time cost. So yeah, you can play with the math to get everything to feel right, and you can create as many factors as you want. Right? You can say, you know, how much will this cost to support? How much will this cost to maintain? How much will this cost to refactor? Right? And from that, you can start to get into the technical debt and UX debt calculations and start to say, well, how much debt are we going to incur by going down this road, and then have to come back and fix and use that as part of it. So there's all sorts of ways to manipulate the formula. You just have to be consistent. So when you're looking at everything on the roadmap, you're always using the same factors and the same weightings to be able to get to the same outcomes. And that'll give you an apples to apples view of the world.
Sure, and there may be other factors like will my contract pay for cost overruns?
Yeah.
Right.
No, there's all sorts of things that you can put into it, and you can look at history, and you can look at the people making estimates, and you can start to refine. And you know, this is one of the things with confidence, is confidence allows you to adjust up or down based on your history. And if you're always overestimating effort or underestimating effort, you can adjust for that and use the confidence numbers to help you figure out how you might change your process to get better at it.
Great. So Union asks, how do we know if the problem to solve is specific enough? For example, college students are feeling lonely, probably really lonely these days. That's a very broad statement, a need. How do we know how to scope down to a more narrow problem that can be addressed?
That's a good question. So my take on it is this, right? So this is where I tend to go for outcomes over problems in that regard. And outcomes, I don't, when I'm thinking about outcomes, I don't consider attitude. So feeling would not be something that I consider. What I want to see is the change in the world, right? If someone is feeling lonely, or if we solve the problem of someone feeling lonely, so they no longer feel lonely, what's the behavior we see in the world, right? So what are the behaviors we see today? What are the behaviors we would see in the world? So because it's the behavior that's the actual improvement in life, right? Feelings are to some extent a reaction to the environment and the context. So they're feeling lonely because things are happening. What would be the thing that would we would need to change physically in the world that would get them to stop feeling lonely? And what would that look like? That's the interesting question. And then we could ask ourselves from the outcome, since we start with the outcome, we ask, okay, this is the current experience, this is the outcome we want to get. What are all the problems that are preventing that, and how might we work through those problems? So that's the way that I would approach something like that. And you're right, that's a bit of a general thing, and you can fall into a trap when you get a little too general. So you want to try and be as specific as possible, and that's going to have to do with the scope of the roadmap, right? If we're talking about something that we're going to work on for the next 2 years, we can be less specific than if we're talking about something we have to get done in the next quarter.
Well, speaking about the next quarter, boy, this questions are supposed to come in time order, but apparently Brandon is in a very different time zone.
Ha.
But 11 a.m., 11:50 a.m. Okay. Brandon wants to know, he's thinking about how clients and their executive sponsors, they love some features. Doing the work while also educating a client team along the way is very tough. With management looking over your shoulder. Any tips on that?
Yeah, don't do that. This is not the way we should deliver service in an agency environment, right? There's sort of two types of models. You can either be in the business to teach them things, or you can be in the business to do things for them. But you can't really do both, right? You go to a fancy restaurant, they won't teach you how they're cooking the meal as they cook it. They just, back in the days when we would go to fancy restaurants, of course, they either cook the meal, or you go to a cooking class and they teach you how to cook it, but and they give you the meal as sort of a side thing, but that you're going there to learn, right? And so that's we want to create the model that way. And if we're setting the expectation that they're going to learn what we're doing, and particularly learn why we're doing what we're doing as we're doing it, because we haven't actually sold the project correctly, we have a bigger problem, right? The issue here is, if you've got clients who are questioning what you're doing because they don't understand what you're doing, then you're not doing it right. You didn't set up this engagement properly. And so the solution there is to scope the engagement and show how you're going to do it, so that when you come in, there's no surprises. Then they understand why you're making the decisions you're making and how you're doing it, just like you understand why the chef delivers the meal to you the way you ordered it, but in the presentation they choose. And that's the way that we need to sort of think about this stuff. Hopefully that's helpful. But it sounds like it's something's not right in the way your projects are being engaged.
It does make me hungry, though.
Yes. Well, I know that feeling.
Let's see. We have a lot of interesting questions here. Chris asks, how do you justify the effort required for an excellent experience when a just barely good enough experience would solve the problem, even if it doesn't really satisfy or delight the end users? I guess, how do you measure delight?
Well,
I would add that too.
delight is sort of an opposition of frustration. So if you're not frustrating people, you're delighting them. It is possible that you could hit this sort of neutral balance point where it's neither frustrating nor delightful. But I pretty much guarantee you that if something used to be frustrating and it's not as frustrating, that almost always registers as delight in the user's mind. So it's almost impossible to get to that neutral point of something being there. This is a concern that people have that rarely manifests itself in real life, right? Chances are, if you're doing something that is just satisfactory, either what it is isn't important, or it is, or you're not measuring the right things, right? I go to the post office because I'm moving. I'm going to fill out a change of address form. You know, the change of address form is a simple little form. I just put the old address, I put the new address, I check off some boxes, I send it in, right? There's not a lot of delight that's going to come out of filling out the address form, but there could be a lot of frustration if the form is designed poorly. And so that is very utilitarian. But you know what? It would be really delightful if I didn't have to go to the post office. It'd be even more delightful if I could do it online. It'd be even more delightful if, because I'm already a customer of the online service, it knew things like where I currently live and automatically filled that in. And suddenly, you know, this isn't delight in the same way of coming into your hotel room and finding a bunch of towels made into gorillas, but it is delight in terms of the fact that we have just made your day easier, and it has solved a problem specifically. So you look for the things that are taking people's time. You look for the things that are wasting their effort. You look for the places where a little automation could just be a little smarter. And incrementally, you make things more and more delightful, one over the other. And it doesn't have to be this, you know, this moment of joy where they're doing a little dance because they just filled out this amazing change of address form. It really is just respecting. And one way to think about delight versus frustration is frustration often comes when we miss the expectations people have for us, whereas delight comes when we exceed the expectations. So just making that form really simple possibly exceeds the expectations that many people had in filling out that form, because they expected it to be worse.
Sure. You're removing the friction points.
Exactly.
That you know, we would encounter, you know, at the registry of motor vehicles or the DMV,
Bingo.
whatever.
Bingo. Which, by the way, little known fact, Massachusetts has the highest rated Department of Motor Vehicles of all 50 states. All the other states are envious of how good Massachusetts has made the Department of Motor Vehicle service. Just that out there.
That's a frightening thought.
Yeah. Maybe Peter can get someone from the DMV to come and talk about how they did that, because it's actually a pretty impressive story.
Yeah.
Yes. How's that, Peter? So this is
you have a contact for that?
I don't, but I know people who do.
Why don't you send me email about it?
No, you know who to email.
So this is a little techie sounding. I'll read it as it was written here. How do you suggest separating budgeting / investment for, quote, generative or non-directive research versus evaluative or current project research? Is it difficult to have a designer who is in project mode also step back and think big picture and, quote, what else might be important?
Well, it's a learned skill.
Time splits?
Yeah, I mean, it's a learned skill. It is over time. It's something you learn how to do. So you know, you do it in baby steps, and you pick it up as time goes on. The key thing is from a budgeting perspective is you know, talk in terms of the value you're delivering by allocating the budget. And what would it take to spend time learning from your users? And you know, if right now 80 or more percent of your time is spent doing sort of evaluative quality control style usability testing research, then, you know, what would it take to make that, you know, less than 80%? Let's get it down to 70%. Then let's get it down to 60%. And how much would it take to do that? And could you find time during sprints? Could you find time in other modes to make that happen? And that would be my recommendation there, is to go in that direction.
Okay. Let's see. We have some questions from anonymous attendee, and anonymous attendee is really prolific.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's one individual or many.
That's the whole anonymous thing.
Yeah. Can you talk more about the differences in value in measuring sentiment changes versus observing behavioral changes? In my organization, leadership has stood up an evaluative model wholly centered around sentiment, and measuring outcomes seems to be falling on ears that don't want to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big fan of sentiment measures. So I look for behavior. The medium of designers is behavior. So that's what we care about, right? It's anybody who knows me knows that I complain about United Airlines a lot, and I complain about them a lot because I really don't like them, but I don't really have any choices, or at least when I was flying, I didn't have many other choices to fly United Airlines other than, you know, maybe American, which really wasn't any better and was less convenient in most of the types of places I was trying to go. So I ended up flying United a lot. My sentiment towards United is very low. But, you know, my behavior is that I'm always booking flights on United and I'm flying on them. So from United's perspective, do they care about my sentiment? Obviously not. If they did, they would have done something about it a long time ago. They instead care about my behavior. Now, if they want to improve the experience, there's lots of behavioral things they can do that would actually improve my sentiment. But my sentiment is completely a reaction to the behavior. And so focus on the behavior and work from there. And so I am not a big fan of sentiment measures, of asking people if they're satisfied or net promoter score or any of these types of things. These are not good research tools. They do not give us insights on what we should do differently. They do not help us make improvements. That's why when we talked about, you know, college students feeling lonely, it's not that they're feeling lonely that's the problem. It's some manifestation of behaviors that are creating the issue, right? They're not socializing. They're not getting time with friends. What does time with friends mean? Is there a way to do that in a COVID pandemic environment that would help them not feel so lonely? If we look for the behaviors, we'll be able to see what's going on. And so that's the thing I would focus on.
I'm reminded of you talking about, in terms of sentiment analysis, being handed a customer feedback form when you were checking out of some hotel, and said something to the clerk that you thought well of it. But then they said, "Oh, would you like to fill out this feedback form?"
Yeah,
very selective.
One of the last international trips I took before the pandemic was to Porto, and United had put us up in this hotel because part of the engine flew off on our plane as it was landing, and they didn't have anybody in Portugal who could fix the plane, so they just canceled the flight. And United only had one flight a day in and out of Portugal, out of Porto at least, and so so they had to put us up in the hotel till the next day's flight. And so we were staying at this hotel in Porto, and I had very low expectations of it, but it was actually quite delightful. They exceeded my expectations quite a bit. So as we're walking out the door, I mentioned to the person at the desk that this was really quite delightful. I didn't have to say anything to them. I didn't have to pay anything. United was picking up the tab. We just had to go to the airport at this point. But I decided to stop and say something. And it wasn't until I said something really nice that the clerk reached on the counter and said, "Would you do me a big favor?" and handed me a Net Promoter Score survey and asked me to recommend them. And it made me giggle, because had I not said something nice, I would have never seen the survey. If I'd said something not nice, I'm sure I wouldn't see the survey. And I'm pretty sure that clerk gets, a bonus based on the positive scores on that survey. So this is the problem with these types of sentiment scores. They're really not helpful. And so that's the key piece of it.
Yeah, your measurement meter sticks have to be unbiased and not somehow self-selecting. Sure.
Yeah.
Well, anonymous attendee, prolific, as I said, also asks, does a segmentation user persona research have any place in mapping out a product roadmap? Why or why not? I guess a persona is sort of like use cases, or
personas are well, it depends how they do personas. There are so many different ways to do personas. That's the beauty of them. There are so many ways to choose from. Most people do personas based on, if they're talking about segmentation, they're probably talking about roles. So segmentation and persona, so it's like teacher versus student versus administrator, and you do personas based on that. I'm not a fan of those types of personas, so I don't think they have a place here. I don't think I have a place anywhere really. The way I'm interested in personas is around differences in specific scenarios. So that was the direction you were heading at, and that's a smart direction, right? So if we look at a given scenario and we ask the question, is the reason people are doing this, if we go and we study people doing a particular scenario, do we see differences because of who they are? So for example, imagine some complicated app. One of the teams I'm working with now is the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and they have all these very complicated apps that they are using to basically do systems modeling for these systems that, you cannot do a hardware replacement of a Mars rover. It's it either works or it doesn't work. And so so they have to do all this work to prepare before they launch to figure out how to do this. And they have these very complex systems. But the thing is that they have so many tools, so many elements, that you could be, one of the world's smartest astrophysicists, but still not know how to use something, right? Because these tools are uber sophisticated and you have to have experience doing it. So you have two people trying to do the same thing. Let's say some sort of test and validation of a particular system dynamic. And one person has no problem doing it. The other person struggles and has to look a lot of stuff up in the manual. And is it because the design of the product was flawed for them? Or was it because they have different levels of experience, and one's just figured out how to get these things done, and the other one hasn't quite figured out how to get these things done? And so once we start to look at what are the differences between the individuals, when we go out and do research and we watch these two individuals using these tools, are there things about who the person is that actually changes how they respond to the tool and how they react to it? And that's where personas become useful. Because if I start to see patterns in differences between people, then I can qualify those patterns and I can name them. And I can say, well, someone who's been doing systems engineering, so we'll call them the experienced systems engineer, someone who's been doing systems engineering now for a decade has no trouble, but someone who is new to systems engineering, they don't know how to use this tool because they've never had the opportunity to master it. They might be some of the world's brightest systems engineers, but they've never used the tool, and therefore they don't have the experience with it. And so we have inexperienced and experienced, and that becomes a useful persona, but only because in that scenario we notice that difference. So you have to do the scenarios first. If you understand the scenarios that people are using things, then you can decide whether the personas matter. And the scenarios lead to outcomes and problems to solve. And at that point, yes, a persona difference of solving a problem, it may be specific to a particular persona of people who have that problem, where there are other folks who don't have that problem. But you have to get to that granularity of persona for that to be useful.
And as I recall, you've said a lot of this is not rocket science because you've worked with people who are rocket science.
Very strict definition as to what's rocket science, and
right,
they will tell us that this is not it.
Right. Enrique, sort of the segue into this next one. Enrique asks if user experience research should be a responsibility only for UXers.
Oh God, no.
Or should all the team members, the developers, product managers, stakeholders, get involved? If yes. So, how do we get them involved?
We bring them to the research, and we here's my thinking at this point, right? You would not hire a product manager who could not read. You'd probably not hire one who couldn't do math. There are some basic skills that people have to have. And I'm of the opinion that basic research is one of them. Basic research, basic design, right? It is the case that these are no longer skills that should be segregated. You know, there was a time where if you needed something to be read out loud, you would bring it to the person who had reading skills in the business. And there was only one or two of those people, and they read everything for everybody, right? We used to specialize that, but we don't do that anymore. It used to be, there was a time where if you needed math done, you went to the math person in the business. But now math is a basic skill that everybody should have. And I'm of the opinion that we should be teaching this in grade school. And these are skills that will be useful all through life. Because if you're a senior executive and you can do basic research, you can uncover problems that nobody else is uncovering. Would you do it all the time? Well, you don't do math all the time. You don't read all the time, but you use it all the time. So yes, this is something that we should, here's a party moment for me. A party moment for me is when I see a company that refuses to hire anybody that doesn't have basic design skills. Like, you can't even get into accounting if you don't have basic design skills. Everyone in the company has to understand design. It makes hiring much harder, but the quality of products that company produces is incredibly better. Is that where we're going to end, Wendy?
We are running out of time, so I think that would be a good end point.
Time seems to be progressing independent of what we do. Yes.
let me throw a couple of questions here that are sort of next steps kind of questions, and I'll sort of glom them all together. Gabriella asks, could you recommend some great books related to UX research?
should I just
another is
we do this as a lightning round? You want me to just do that and then we'll move on?
Well, sure. Go ahead with that one, and I'll find. There's a couple more of like how to proceed from here for next steps.
Sure. So Greg Bernstein, who is currently the head of research at, of all places, Signal, but he was previously at Vox, previously before that at MailChimp. He just has a brand new book. It's just out. You could start ordering it this week, called Research Practices. That's what I want to say it's called. I can tell you real quick. So that's one that I would recommend. I love Erica Hall's Just Enough Research, Dana Chisnell's The Handbook of Usability Testing, Kim Goodwin's Design in the Digital Age, Indy Young's book on empathy is fantastic. Those are the ones that just jumped into my head real quick.
I think that also addresses Praveen's question. Can you suggest good resources to up his research skills? Same sort of thing.
Yeah. Actually, that's a great question to come in and post in the Leaders of Awesomeness community, because our master curator, Miss Jessica Ivins, she will answer you with all the resources that we use at our school, the Center UX Design School. She will give you the resources we use for that, and she's curated quite a great collection. Greg's book is called Research Practice, and that's Greg with three G's, Gregg Bernstein, and it just came out this week. Okay.
Do you want to wrap up with restating the link to that center?
Yeah. So the Leaders of Awesomeness community is here. I'll put it in the Slack. You can go in, it's free, and that's where you'll find the Taking Control of Agile UX Intensive. I hope to see you there.
Terrific.
Okay. Thank you very much for encouraging my behavior. And
thank you so much.
Wash your hands, stay 6 feet apart, wear your masks.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We're going to end in a second. So just wanted to tell you we appreciate all of your great comments, questions, and being here. And thank you, especially Jared. It was great.
You're very welcome.